Hi there, I'm Margareta Dobgal, and I'm your host. I'm the Managing Director of ResourceWorks Society, which is pleased to welcome you to a live taping of our webinar with some subject matter experts on Northeast British Columbia. I'd like to first acknowledge that we're gathered here today on the traditional and ceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we're grateful to be working, living, playing on these lands and doing our part to help advance meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. It is about balancing energy, environment, and reconciliation in Northeast British Columbia's Peace River region. And we're so excited to be here today with Rawi Nur, who's the lead author of the report, research manager, ResourceWorks, with Inez Piccinino, who is a regulatory expert, and Simone Chapezia, CEO of SSK Construction. I'll give you a little bit of context about each of these individuals and give them a chance just to share some brief introductory remarks about the work that they're doing and what they're hoping to impart to you in today's webinar. Simone Chapezia is an Indigenous woman and a proud member of her traditional territory of Blueberry River First Nations. With over a decade of experience, Simone began her career in her 20s, working on construction sites, gaining hands-on experience, navigating challenges, and building a deep understanding of the industry from the ground up, often as one of few women on sites. Now Simone is the founder and president of SSK Construction, which means earth, soil, ground, or dirt. Simone is also director and owner of Greenmon Inspection Services, a respected oil field inspection firm. She holds certifications and brings technical expertise and field experience to her leadership. Simone's career started in the pipeline industry, where she specialized in coatings applications, repair, and quality control. At her core, Simone is a proud laborer, carrying the values of hard work, integrity, and respect for the trades into every role she holds today. Thanks so much, Simone, for joining us. Excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And thank you for inviting me for this wonderful opportunity.
Thanks so much. Inez Piccinino retired from the British Columbia government in 2023 after 20 years as a senior executive, including 6 years as assistant deputy minister and 5 years as executive vice president at the BC Energy Regulator. Having worked in energy, environment, climate change, economics, and regulatory, a lot of things there, Inez developed strategic public policy requiring deep and complex engagement and negotiations with communities, Indigenous partners, industries, stakeholders, and other jurisdictions. With a degree in economics from the University of Buenos Aires, Inez has consulted for the World Bank, the UN Development Program, and the Inter-American Development Bank, and she provides advice to the private, public, and non-governmental sectors and has done so for her 30-plus year professional career across 2 continents. She's a professor of economics at the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and has taught at Camosun College and the University of Victoria's Masters of Public Administration, and has started her own consulting company, Aldea Global Insights, in June 2023, providing advice on energy, economics, ESG, climate, social development, and negotiation strategies to clients. Thanks so much, Inez, for coming over from Victoria to be here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and hope that we have a very interesting conversation about the report. Looking forward to being the final version.
I'm sure our audience is as well. And now over to Rawi Nur, our research manager at ResourceWorks. He holds a Master's of Science in Forestry from the University of British Columbia, which was supported by the Canada Graduate Scholarship, CGSM, as well as a BA in Political Science and Economics, also from UBC. At ResourceWorks, and we're very, very lucky to have him, he translates complex carbon policies, regulatory hurdles, and shifting energy markets into clear insights that guide decision makers and the public through meaningful discussions on economic reconciliation and the energy trilemma: security, affordability, and sustainability. His goal is simple: keep the conversation honest, data-driven, and focused on workable solutions. Thanks, Rawi, for all your hard work to get this report in order, but also for joining us here for this webinar.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation, a part of this table. And I hope we can move the needle, or if at all, on some of these topics, or at least try to understand them better.
At the very least, equipping our audience for engaging with these issues in a more informed way. Thanks so much for joining us then. We'll be going to Rawi's presentation now. Fantastic. Over to you, Rawi.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm excited to share insights from our upcoming report, Shaping the Peace, Balancing Energy, Environment, and Reconciliation in Northeast B.C. This report is part of our new Shared Prosperity series, focusing on regions that significantly contribute to British Columbia's economy and environment. So British Columbia's economy is no longer the same as it was a generation ago. Climate commitments, permitting delays, inflationary shocks, and rising global instability from the South China Sea to Eastern Europe have changed the stakes. But one thing remains constant: the Peace region and its people are providers. They generate a substantial share of the wealth that pays for public services across the province, even as they bear the heaviest burdens of industrial development, regulatory uncertainty, and infrastructure gaps. Our report is rooted in real human experiences. Award-winning communicator Julie Rogers spent months gathering frontline perspectives. These stories translate complex technical findings into plain language narratives, showing the personal impacts and realities for the people living and working in the Northeast. Let's start off with what is the Northeast and where is it? Northeast British Columbia spans approximately 200,000 kilometers squared. It makes up about 22% of the province's total land area. For context, Northeast BC is big enough to fit Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, with more room to spare as well. Despite comprising just 1% of BC's population, Northeast BC produces 93% of the province's natural gas and contributes 38% of its hydroelectric power. This region might be small demographically, but economically and strategically, it's indispensable. Peace region hosts vital infrastructure for the province. The WAC Bennett Dam, the Peace Canyon Dam, and the Site C dams are foundational to our power grid. Additionally, the Motley Formation is crucial, feeding major LNG facilities from Kitimat to Silizans. Together, these assets significantly bolster BC's energy security. While BC has ambitious climate goals through its Clean BC roadmap, practicalities raise questions. Meeting targets like reducing oil and gas emissions by up to 38% and electrifying LNG projects would require power equivalent to 2.5 times the Site C's output. Compounding those challenges, permitting for resource projects currently takes around 8 years, double the intended provincial target. Yet there are substantial economic opportunities amidst these challenges. Over the next 30 years, restoration projects in the region represent a $20 billion market, amounting to $600 million annually on average. This initiative promises stable employment for local and Indigenous communities, developing essential skills such as ecological monitoring, heavy equipment operation, and cultural advisory roles. Northeast BC also holds significant potential in critical minerals, vital for a clean technology. The region's lithium-rich formation waters and rare-bearing carbonites align with federal and provincial exploration initiatives. This presents as a significant opportunity for workforce transition, turning traditional workers into skilled contributors within emerging battery supply chains. We have 5 pivotal groundbreaking recommendations that we are providing in this report. 1, celebrating the Northeast BC, recognizing the contributions province-wide. 2, funding geoscience research. Building public trust through reliable data requires stable funding for organizations that do the on-the-ground work necessary for these industries to continue doing the work they do. 3, aligning climate policy with the on-ground capacity that we have and the electrification initiatives that we have as a province. 4, expanding the revenue sharing frameworks that we've built on. So, for example, the Peace River Agreement, ensuring sufficient spending on healthcare, education, and infrastructure. And lastly, investing in skills and workforce transitions, focusing on the emerging sectors, restoration, and mineral sectors as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rami. No, and this is some of about 6 months of work for us as an organization, and a good amount of hours, I would say almost all of his hours and then some, week to week, just to get all these ideas together. And the nature of doing a report like this is you end up with so much to take in. It's hard to prioritize, and part of the rationale and how we wanted to do this webinar today was to round out the issues. So there's a couple of areas of overlap between our experts here, and of course the expertise that Rawi has built up as a facilitator and a convener of all of these ideas and these inputs from different organizations, different people. One that has been really vital to our efforts has been the Fort St. John and District Chamber of Commerce. We're really grateful to them for their support and the expertise they've provided, the grounding, and their partnership in launching this report next week. And of course, if you want to dig deeper into it, you'll have to wait until Monday, but we're excited to share it with you because it's an attempt to really drive into what it means not only for this region to be at the center of so many provincial and national priorities around climate, around energy export, around even critical minerals opportunities. Still no active operating critical minerals mines in the region, but there's definitely belief that there can be if the right conditions are met. And being at the center of all these things is important for the region because it's opportunities for employment, it's opportunities for growth, it's opportunities for economic reconciliation, it's opportunities for us to really meaningfully bolster the urban-rural conversation. But it's also vital to the overall economic success, the success on a cultural and societal level of many, many pressing and pertinent files around labor market utilization, around ensuring that we have true, meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous communities. So all of these things are coming together in an intersection, and that region is at the forefront. So we wanted to do this work. And I'll actually start off with a question to Inez, because she's been at the center of many of these decisions from a provincial perspective, having worked in the provincial government. And now, of course, you're in your consulting practice, you're working a combination of different clients. So you have lens into corporate and government priorities. I'm curious from your perspective, Inez, what tactics have actually moved the needle in terms of helping city-based decision makers or those whose majority voting base is city-based to understand rural priorities and what they mean for the province as a whole?
It's a great question, and I think one that as public servants we all struggle with, particularly when you have a new government and you have to again provide exposure to new ministers and cabinet ministers. And I think that exposure is my short answer, and it's an answer that I would give to a bunch of other questions that I'm sure are going to come up today. And exposure, in my opinion, doesn't mean putting a new appointed minister in a helicopter to kind of tour around a big area and, point at features. Exposure means sitting, decision makers down with local politicians, with local people, with the Indigenous peoples in the area, and having real conversations about what living in the Northeast actually is like and how much the Northeast brings in terms of value to the whole province of British Columbia.
That's a really good answer. And, we had that happen in a little microcosm, where I always trip to the Northeast. My first trip to the Northeast as well. I've been up north, but not that far up north, many times over the course of my work. And for each of us, it was kind of a, eyes wide open. We met with Simone and some friends and had, a lovely dinner conversation. And, there's things that to anyone who works in resource industries or is familiar with them will emerge as, oh, yeah, that sounds familiar. We've heard this kind of thing before. And then there's just things that blow your mind. You're like, wow, you mean to say that there are communities that have had chronic, horrible issues with access to basic energy security? And we were hearing from some folks who live in Fort Nelson and, rolling brownouts, actual blackouts on a regular basis, families having to, worry about their entire food supply for the year actually going kaput because they don't have stable and secure power. And, it's the issues that are felt by other remote rural communities across the country and globally, but to see that this is a region that is in some ways among the most prosperous, there continue to be these issues, really opened my eyes. And I was grateful for the chance to chat and to meet you properly, Simone, in that context. Question for you, Simone. I've shared your bio with the audience, and your name crops up in so many circles. People keep saying, this is a young woman who is really just pioneering, going straight ahead into, starting her own construction business, really leaning into some of these economic prosperity opportunities that are emerging in the region. And I wanted to maybe get a sense check from you, from your perspective, what kind of support do leaders like you need to succeed? How is that support shaping up right now?
I think that, supporting young entrepreneurs is kind of, I think it's difficult for a lot of people because they see us as very young. And then also I feel like there's just a small level of distrust. But yet there's a lot of support for us, but it's just kind of confusing. So I think just actual tangible support, whether that be just believing in us when we're trying to take that step and cross that threshold into actually, owning businesses and entering, a competitive market, and trusting that, even though that we're young, that we're capable of doing these things. And especially myself, I have so much experience in the construction sector. And so it's kind of frustrating not being able to, cross that threshold knowing that I can, and I've gathered all this experience to do that. So yeah, just trusting the youth to take that torch and keep going with it.
Would you tell me a little bit more about your business? So what is Siski hoping to do? Like, what are the types of clients or the types of projects or activities that you want to be supporting with your company?
Yeah, so Siski Construction is a civil earthworks company, and that's a lot of like dirt work and like road building, pad building, facility. We even do demolition, lots of restoration. And for me, why Siski is important for me is because I've had so much success in the industry. I pipelined for 8 years. I transitioned into inspection roles, and yeah, just like I had so much industry support. And so but the other thing is like it took me away from my community. So I had to commit to months away, and just for the past couple years, I've been a lot closer to home and realizing this is where I need to be, and grateful for all that knowledge that I've accrued. But like my question now is, how do I take that success and duplicate it for the people like my peers or the youth coming up behind me? And so it's more than just like a construction business. For me, it's like building that legacy and finding those areas of support that I find that are like kind of largely ignored, such as like low income housing, senior support, senior housing, and just creating a better like connection to our municipality of Fort St. John, and kind of trying to urbanize more than we are, and answering a lot of social questions that that as a younger person moving into the middle-aged generation, I'm inheriting a lot of this stuff. So to me, Siski is a way to answer a lot of these questions that people in my community have.
I really like how this is a theme that, we see translated perfectly on the broader provincial level as well. So, this question of how do you pay for the things that are important to you as a society, as a people, as a nation, answering that, I think, requires productive export industries of some kind. When we're talking about the broader BC economy, so much of the provincial government's ability to fund these services comes from activities that happen in the northeast of British Columbia. And then, to your point, like you're thinking about how you can take that success, that prosperity pipeline, and leverage it not only to be closer to your community and the work that you do, the expertise you've accrued, but then also to provide opportunities for your peers, for generations younger than you, folks older than you, anyone who wants to be working and employed and have local opportunities, and then also generate revenues that can be invested into social priorities. So I like sort of how that knits it together. And for me, when I first got into the space about 10 years ago, this was one of the biggest aha moments. Like, oh, wow, like we really need to find ways to pay for the things that we want. Otherwise, we can't invest in adaptation and mitigation. If you're concerned about climate change, we can't invest in schools and post-secondaries. We can't invest in healthcare if we don't have the money. So for me, that was a big aha moment. But, Rawi's a little bit fresher out of the academic context and came to us not long after he finished his master's research. And Rawi, I'm curious from your perspective, coming from academia into working with ResourceWorks, what findings or what general insights doing this research, being immersed in this environment, have most upended your preconceptions about industrial climate policy, resources generally?
No, I think that's a really good question. And I think the aha moment I had was kind of similar to yours, where it's like, now I feel like the biggest eye-opener was kind of moving beyond those polarized headlines, like industry wrecks the planet, or regulation kills jobs and it kills the economy and it kills our industries and whatnot. It's two sides of it. It's two extremes, and you don't really get actionable policy, or you don't even grok what needs to happen and how we should move forward as a society, as a collective. And then when I went to the Northeast, talked to people at Fort St. John and Dawson Creek, people working in the industry as well, just talking to people turning wrenches on the field. Many rig hands, drill supervisors, and First Nation guardians, they know every creek crossing and they know the Caribou Trails by heart. That information you don't get talking to many people in urban areas, I will say, like a lot of urbanites are very detached from the realities happening in the Northeast, in a lot of the industries that we fight, and at the same time we regulate as well. Like both are important. So I think one moment that stands out for me is a conversation with William Sambrook. I think we were in the Northern Lights College in Dawson Creek, and he trains heavy equipment operators for the Montney Formation. And he walked me through how badly a graded pad can choke a creek with sediment in hours, and how a 2-hour delay in plugging a brine leak can double up the cleanup footprint. So it was the small details, the attention to details, is the follow-up questions I had about the actual spills to the environment, how they're protecting it. It's a lot of the questions that you might find in a Twitter thread, but might not find answers to. And then you talk to the people working in the field, and they actually they hunt on those lands, they fish on those lands, they raise kids on those same lands, so they understand the actual consequences as well. So bridging the gap and moving beyond that polarization was the most eye-opening thing for me, is doing this research and actually engaging with preconceived notions that I had about industries that I wasn't really familiar with as much as I thought I was.
Yeah, it was a big aha moment for me too, because you go to university and you have sort of this idea of like, okay, there's this polarized schism. You're either pro-capitalism, pro-extractive resource industry, or you're pro-economy. And it can be hard for someone who's being taught to ask critical questions, maybe in a biased way sometimes, to try to knit those two together in a way that is pragmatic and actually tuned for knowing how to look at political parties' platforms and make an informed decision as a voter, or if you're a reporter in media, knowing how to navigate this in a way that catches people's interest, but also helps build towards more constructive discourse and societal consensus building. And that's a challenge decision makers have a lot of the time. And I know Inez has spent a lot of time thinking about what decision makers need to know, to make good decisions. And I'd say, for me, it's sort of this perception that there is this polarization. So therefore, people in each camp might also have like really constrained views, but that's not true. Like if we're talking about resource workers, and we saw that, of course, when we were in Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, and surrounding areas a couple months back. And I see this every day when I talk to resource workers across the country. They take immense pride in doing things well, because you're right, they know the land. They take pride in applying that expertise, that knowledge, that technical mastery of the equipment that they work with, and the scientific and technical knowledge they have to be immersed in order to do their jobs well. And that translates up to corporate priorities. That translates to how companies want to do better. And we've seen that commitment come through in a million different ways. But anyways, I digress. I can go on this topic for a long time. I wanted to ask a provocative question. Everyone always loves to get this one. And we'll go to Inez first for this one. If you had a magic wand, say you were premier for a day, you had a chance to change any provincial policy, what would you change first and why?
Okay, I'm going to focus on natural resources, because we could talk about other areas, but I'm going to focus on the focus of this webinar. I think I would really focus on restoration. Rawi was going through his slides, and he talked about some findings from previous work that I did for the BC Oil and Gas Research and Innovation Society with a couple of colleagues. And we started talking about a concept that I think is important, which is the restoration market. So everybody looks at restoration as the end of life part of the oil and gas sector, the forestry sector, mining sector, and we are not looking at it as the big opportunity it actually is. Because a lot of the activities, not all of them, but a lot of the activities that happen in restoration are actually similar across the board from all those sectors. The moment you start putting it all together, and actually the report has some numbers that talk about how big it actually is, you suddenly realize that it's a huge opportunity, and it's an opportunity for collaboration where we all agree that we're supposed to clean after ourselves, and where you can bring all that energy of working together for all the different parties that are involved into building new businesses, new opportunities for young people in the area, and recovering the environment, doing something productive in terms of climate change, and definitely helping the industry grow. Because the more that we clean the stuff that we did decades ago, the more space there's going to be and opportunities there's going to be for doing things better going forward. So definitely, I think restoration and looking at it as a market and an opportunity for collaboration.
Yeah. And of course, as you engage in more activities on the upstream production side, your environmental liabilities grow, and you have to continuously be looking at ways to restore.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of regulations that actually make you clean in certain cadence, particularly everything that has to do with oil and gas wells. And I think industry has been very committed about that, dealing with the stock, the stuff that comes from the 60s, 70s, 80s. But the requirements are there. So you're going to have legal requirements that actually, and this is strange, usually you don't have this in many markets, that you know there's going to be demand. There is going to be demand here because, as activity continues, maybe 25, 30 years of a well producing, at a certain point you're going to get into restoration mode, and you're going to have to do it because there's legal requirements to do it. And again, as things progress, likely those requirements are going to get more sophisticated with much more input in terms of nations talking about how that restoration should be done on the ground. And I'm sure that Simone might have some comments and thoughts about that. But I definitely think it would be a fantastic idea for having more work thinking as a restoration as a market.
And to put it into perspective, when you're flying over the region, if you're landing at the largest airport in Fort St. John, you're seeing, particularly at night, thousands and thousands of operating well pads, and that's natural gas that's being produced. We have a map that's going to be shared in the report on Monday, and mapping out those actual well pads, the map would just be covered in dots. It wouldn't be useful information. So I just focused on compressor stations and gas plants and things like that are indicative of the broader footprint. But not to put you on the spot, Inez, but having worked in the regulatory space for the upstream here in BC, do you have a ballpark figure of how many active wells there are at any given time?
I think about 10,000 would be a safe number at this point. My ex-colleagues at the BC Energy Regulator likely are saying, "What did she say?" But around that number, I think it's right now. One important thing to mention here is the fact that development has changed so dramatically. You were talking about pads, and that's the new type of development, the shale gas, tight gas, and by new I mean 2007, 2008. All the stuff that is being restored these days is actually usually from an older vintage than that, where people were actually drilling individual wells. Many times they were not successful, so the hole was there, left there, and who knows what happened. So you are dealing with a lot of that stuff that was much more aggressive in terms of environmental footprint than the stuff that is being drilled these days in pads. You have one pipe going to the pad. Before you had pipes going to each individual wells that were all over the place. We were running out of gas in North America not so long ago, and we tend to forget that because after shale and tight, now it's abundant. But lots of opportunity to deal with that full footprint for sure.
That's a really, really great answer to the question. I think at this point we'll pass to Simone. You have the magic wand now. What is the first policy you want to target provincially?
Yeah, just speaking back to Inez's thoughts about the growth of restoration. I think with a magic wand, I would probably try to perfect the follow through of these policies because I feel like they're so large scale, and I think that are they affecting the communities properly? Are they doing what they're intended to do? So, I would just try to perfect a reviewal process to make sure that, policies are successful.
That's a really, really good way to put it. Okay, well, then we'll turn to you, Riley. You have the magic wand now. What is the next policy piece that you do?
I think regardless, again, I guess we are focusing on the resource industries in the conversation so far, as Inez pointed out. But it doesn't matter what the sector is. A lot of the conversations that I've had in this report, regardless of the sector that I was asking about, it seemed that there was a real skill shortage problem. The policies are there, the action plans are there, but there's no real way to address the skill shortages that we're facing as a province and how to tackle it in the most efficient way. So I think creating a skills first rule for any major project going forward, fixing a share of the capital budgets for local training tied to long-term restoration, clean tech and monitoring jobs,
funds flowing to rural colleges, mobile training units, paid apprenticeships run with First Nations, that groundwork that has to do with upskilling and the capacity building that needs to happen at the local, at the ground level, I think is important before we continue pushing pipe dreams of projects and ideas that we can't actually achieve without the necessary workforce to do so. So I think a skills first rule is essential for these conversations, whatever the sector is.
It's a really, really good frame, actually. And we've heard this for decades. Any public policy wonk that you talk to in natural resources will tell you that labor mobility is a challenge, adequate investment in certain skilled trades, and even just having the right workers. There's kind of higher level solutions around immigration pathways to attract more people with either kind of the full skill set or the raw ingredients needed to build that skill set from abroad to come and work in Canada. And there's challenges even to this day with recognition of certifications and credentials across jurisdictions within Canada. So when we did some work in 2020, we did a report called the under the Task Force for Real Jobs, Real Recovery, and it was convening I think 40 different groups, industry associations, lots of folks from labor, to come to us and just tell us, okay, here are all of the things that need to happen to fully unlock Canada's economic recovery from COVID-19. And we heard this over and over, that, qualified tradespeople can't always move where they need to go. And there's just some gaps, some low-hanging fruit that need to be addressed. So it's a really good frame on that. I want to dive in a little bit more to restoration, and as you sort of spoke about the compliance piece, and that drives demand currently for that market. You're very right that this is a promising investment opportunity in the sense that we know that demand is there. Activity is going to continue in the upstream. There's also remediation of past environmental liabilities going back decades, as you said, that industry's working with government to take care of. But tell me a little bit more from your perspective how we can move from, do we need to move from legal minimums? What does that look like to reward, incentivize proactive restoration?
Well, I think, and I would love to hear what Simone has to say about this, but I think that there's been growing collaboration between industry and Indigenous nations in terms of having these conversations in terms of what is needed and what's required. I know that from a government perspective, there have been some pilots as well in terms of working together with nations, industry, and trying to come up with better protocols in terms of restoration where everybody can have their say in terms of what are the logical places where you can make improvements that are really valuable for the people that live in the piece, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and what are also feasible from, a development perspective and from an industry perspective. So I think that the more that we work together, the least assumptions we make about what the other parties are talking. And you made a very good point before about all the assumptions we make versus having a dialogue and a conversation, understanding where everybody's coming from. So I think the dialogue is actually the best next step in terms of making restoration even better.
That's a really good frame on it as well. We're hoping this report is the start of that conversation. There's a lot of myth busting that needs to happen. Not everyone who's involved in this broader discursive landscape will have the ability to travel across the province. I certainly hope everyone, instead of going south to the U.S. for your annual vacation, as many Canadians have done, we now have a elbows up approach, and we're trying to, invest in the local economy as much as possible. And perhaps that is part of it, instead of flying to Europe or to Hawaii or wherever your budget can take you for your next family vacation, look at ways to go north, go to the interior, go to the Northeast and meet people, talk to them. And then on the policy subject matter expertise side, certainly invite people to read a report when it comes out and try to immerse themselves into the issues. And if there are questions or things you're still wondering about, we've contacted so many experts, and we've gotten such a rich cross-section of perspectives on how we can fully leverage the potential of this region for its benefit and the benefit of BC as a whole. So always happy to connect people directly. Simone, did you have a thought on going from demand being driven by compliance to proactively incentivizing restoration activities?
I think more discussion between Indigenous communities and back to Rawi's point about, people who live in the area and are very, I guess, like, they're just very familiar with the landscape, and getting their input, because the impact is most felt by the locals. So, it would just be, I think, important to have that perspective, because a lot of policies that are made, like, it's the people who are impacted by the trickle down of that is what's the most important. I think those perspectives are the most building for restoration.
Yeah. And those impacts are what has gotten us in a new and exciting domain, a new and challenging in many ways to turn, legislative regulatory commitments into certainty for business space, and that's coming out of cumulative impacts, cumulative effects on not only environment but also the treaty rights of Treaty 8 nations, and that's been a lot for industry to unpack. We hear about permitting, we hear about, and I'm sure we'll get into permitting because I can already see some questions coming in on that. But I do want to maybe ask for your thoughts on, what does the path forward look like on that? There's sort of a chance to, through this new agreement that has been reached between Crown, Indigenous peoples, and industry kind of on the receiving end of it, to more meaningfully incorporate Indigenous priorities into anything to do with development, issuance of permits, kind of broader based stuff. So that dialogue is having to occur more intensely than it had to in the past. There's similar things, maybe for different reasons, that are happening in other parts of the province. If you're building any kind of major linear infrastructure, you're thinking very seriously right now about how you can consult with rights and title holders. So their input is really, really taken into consideration well before you have a final design, well before you've charted, okay, here's where we think the most economic, viable right-of-way is. And that's happening more proactively than it ever has in the past. But I think returning to your nation and, Blueberry River First Nations, has been at the center of a lot of media attention, a lot of interest from business over the last decade and a bit. What are the ways that is playing out internally that you're seeing, like as far as the impacts of that agreement and opportunities that are emerging on the ground for young people like you?
It definitely kind of hit our community like a tidal wave, both for good and bad reasons. As for economic opportunity, there's lots, but I find that the distribution of that kind of is lacking. And while there is a lot of industry support, I feel like it's not as accessible as it's made to seem. And as well, like on the community level, I think a lot of people don't understand like the significance of this court case. And I don't think anybody in the region like really understands the implications of the severity of it, because it's a completely new landscape for Indigenous peoples to have that those decision-making powers. And so it's impactful for a lot of good and bad ways, like I said, and it's going to be a big long journey for everyone to navigate and learn how to I guess enter this playing field at a magnitude that we've never been included in before. So it's very stressful, but it's also very I'm very optimistic about it. So, we just need to keep pushing forward and again, back to the support piece, support each other, and the youth and the elders, and make sure that we all have an equal voice, because I think that's kind of lost sometimes when the representatives of a nation are just 5 people.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's well beyond a snapshot in time where, your nation's name is in major papers across the province. And, that's a period that can be a couple of months, it can be a couple of years where there's intense focus and interest. But, for you and for your community, that's, the rest of your lives. That's, generations to come that aren't even born yet. It's how that's going to play out in a long-term context. And yeah, that's a piece that I think sometimes gets missed in the broader conversation when we talk about major like landmark decisions, framework agreements, modern treaties being signed. It's what happens after and how the right ingredients can be assembled so that there's enduring success.
Yeah, it's also difficult as well because there's only 500 of us. And so the magnitude of all of this it's very heavy. So
Yeah,
it's another consideration.
absolutely. Yeah, I think I wanted to pass to Rawi just to I want to chime in on some.
I was about to actually. I did wanna, because we were speaking about this briefly before the webinar. Like we were just drinking coffee, and I had this question because I've been seeing a lot of industry CEOs that say this. I've seen on a provincial level, at a federal level, the bills that we're passing, the conversations that we're having, even at the federal election. I think one thing that seems like a very strong contradiction to me is that we have, and I mentioned to both Inez and Simone before the webinar, it seems that we are finally allowing the shared decision-making framework to touch upon the communities that we want to touch upon, right? We want Indigenous people to be equitable partners in any projects going forward. The shared decision-making has to be there. But in the same breath, I'm hearing, in those conversations, I'm hearing, oh, we need to accelerate timelines and approvals and project approvals, and we're passing bills to accelerate them. So in a short form of asking all of this, why is there that contradiction? Where does that come from? And I think I asked that for you, Inez, and I asked you that as well, Simone. And it's hard to wrap my mind around it. And I'm sure it's hard for local citizens reading about these issues and not reading about these issues to kind of wrap their minds around how do we move forward with shared decision making, but also we're trying to streamline approvals at an even faster rate. So, yeah, I want to ask that question.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
It will require time, which again, it's at a premium. And when we're talking about making money, profits, and the need for companies to be successful, it's obviously time is money, but it will require time. And connecting to what Simone was saying before, about talking about her nation, 500 people. As provincial government, we have this idea that just the Western kind of government style, and sometimes we put a lot into nations in terms of revise this 7,000 pages and get back to me tomorrow, and just put it into that dimension. We're talking about 500 people. We're not talking about a bureaucracy, Western government style.
Yeah.
So it is going to take time, and I think from a governance perspective, nations will have to decide how they want to organize themselves going forward. And with that, I'll pass it to Simone, who I'm sure is going to have a better answer than mine.
No, I love all your answers. But yeah, there needs to be like a sympathy towards, I think, First Nations communities in the context of like, this is our first time doing a lot of things. This is our first time being allowed to enter these spaces where we're given the opportunity to make impactful decisions that affect our community. And it's scary, it's new, and it's going to take a while to learn that language because we're a lot of communities are very like rural, and like as much as people like to think that Fort St. John is very advanced, it's not. We are probably like the last largest city and like on the Alaska Highway. And then anything past that is just development or just trees. So a lot of nations are 10 years behind. And so, you have all these companies coming in and saying, here, make some decisions. And it's like, oh, okay, well, first we have to learn how to do that. And also like when there is that pressure of timelines or those expectations, it adds like another layer of confusion. Trying to find our footing in this new landscape, which I'm incredibly grateful for because there's so much consideration for our voices, and I'm very appreciative. But unfortunately, it's going to take a little bit of time to understand like that language.
I'm going to throw in a question from the audience that I think is a perfect flip of the question, perhaps. Investors want certainty. And, the reason we see all this development is because there's a valuable product, a series of valuable products that are located in the region. And getting that to market, getting it in the mechanism of the Canadian economy so that, different levels of governments can take their cuts, so that entrepreneurs and corporations can be involved in that, and then take that, translate that value into the entire value chain. That requires, with the frameworks that we have, the way that decisions are made on land use, decisions are made on permitting, to work with communities. So you can't have, just a straight shot. And we're hearing a huge amount of interest right now from the federal government in Canada as an energy superpower. So that's a theme that's coming up recurrently because the Prime Minister Mark Carney has said that he sees our path to that. I think he also said, and clean technology superpower. So he's spoken about, decarbonizing oil, which is, I think in some ways, you're talking about decarbonization of production, kind of makes sense. In other ways, it's a carbon product. So a little bit of a silly comment to make in other ways. But one of the questions we've had is about investment and, how we can attract investment and create that investor certainty, because these opportunities aren't going to be on the table forever. So given this landscape that we have, where courts have ruled, governments have decided, voters have given governments the mandate to advance reconciliation priorities. How do you balance the two? I don't know. It's a difficult question, but Inez, and thoughts on how we can create that certainty case while still respecting rights, title, and environmental considerations?
I'd win the Nobel Prize if I had a good answer for that. But I'm going to try. I think that markets in general and industry in particular, when making investment decisions or even evaluating where they're going to go and invest, they don't like uncertainty. And I think that having a vision as a country, as a province, and if in a perfect world altogether, is key, is important. People have talked about having energy plans for many times, and Canada used to have many decades ago energy plans that were very structured and created conflict with provinces that didn't agree. And let's be honest, back then nations were an afterthought, and that's the reality. I think that the fact that the courts have decided that there have been very clear decisions actually creates certainty, because you use the present perfect in all those statements. So from a certain perspective, those decisions are behind us. Now it's a question of how they are implemented on the ground. So I don't think that it's actually an uncertainty factor. I think that now we know what we're playing at. So definitely we need a vision. Definitely, there's been changes in the world, and our relationship with the U.S. and looking for new markets to potentially replace the U.S. in many cases. And hey, energy resources are a fundamental thing, could be part of that strategy. So creating that Canadian vision, again, I think is going to be key. But I personally think that the uncertainty is a little bit behind us. It's the implementation, but the decisions are there.
Absolutely. Do you have a thing to add there, Ravi?
I think Simone, and as mentioned earlier, which is that transparency and the dialogue required to have these conversations. When we have these conversations, with the amount of polarization that we're having them with, it's very hard to kind of build that trust between the public, the industry, and the government as well. So it's hard to move the needle on anything. So I think building institutional trust is one of the first steps. And I think as citizens, that requires economic literacy, that requires energy literacy in order to participate in these conversations as well. But it requires us to see the government acting and industry acting in the ways that we want them to act responsibly, for us to be able to trust them and have these conversations and that dialogue in a more fruitful way. So I think the more basic answer than Inez's a high-level answer, I would say. But that's the best thing I can think of.
It's an inherent challenge of, any kind of policymaking. Like, if it was easy, we wouldn't need governments. We wouldn't need to hold someone to account and give them a thrashing. Typically every electoral cycle, but sometimes in the middle of an electoral cycle, governments will do unpopular things, and the public comes knocking, we're ready to give you a spanking. Mr. or Mrs. Premier or Ms. Premier. And, same goes for pressure regulator space. And, sometimes regulatory agencies come under a lot of scrutiny. There's little pressure release valves for that. There's things like public consultations that allow for all views on projects to be heard. We've seen examples of that being used fruitfully, examples of that being kind of gamified, because there may not be the same way to have these broader discussions outside the regulatory environment. And that's, I think, the inherent learning for me here. And I'd love to hear Simone's answer, but I'll just sort of add that it's about allowing for the full facts of these issues and the trade-offs inherent to any decision to be seen by the public and to be understood more meaningfully by the public. And if you're operating in a vacuum, you're getting, polarized opinion here, polarized opinion over here. You're not getting the full picture in a way that allows for you to make an informed decision how you stand as an individual, as a researcher, as a regulator, as an Indigenous community. And if we can bridge that, then we can actually get to good results. How about you, Simone? What are your thoughts on how we reconcile the two in a sense?
I think everybody brought up a point to speak to that, because we do need the economic literacy, and we do need like the confidence in decision making. And so without those pieces, what ends up happening is we have to rely on consultants and lawyers, and then that in turn that results in bad advice. And so there's always a third party in there who's kind of jamming things up. So it's identifying, that bad advice, trimming the fat, and raising economic literacy, and just empowering communities to be able to make those decisions in a confident way that can help progress production and attract investors. But there's so much at play, and it's more complex than I think people think. So
absolutely. Another question from the audience I'm going to ask right now is about how we're going back a little bit to the restoration issue, but I think it ties into economic literacy in a sense as well. If we want decommissioning of oil wells, gas wells to take place, if we want there to be budget to be spent on restoration activities, you need a way to pay for it. You need industry in some form to be operational and active for that skill set and that labor force to be deployable for those types of activities. And I think the way the question was framed was along the lines of, what happens if you don't have that active industry? Who pays for that? And also, maybe more broadly, who pays for restoration activities for facilities that were operational decades ago, where there's no current owner of it. So I don't know. And as I feel like
I can start. Well, luckily the industry is active in the oil and gas side of things, and with good perspectives, LNG Canada started soon, and obviously more talk about LNG now with the new federal government. So I think industry is very aware and supportive of the fact that they need to clean after themselves. There's dormancy and shutdown regulation in the province that actually takes care of all those wells that belong to companies in terms of timelines for restoration. But also there's the Orphan Fund, and the Orphan Fund is run by the BC Energy Regulator, and the money comes from industry. So the money pays as part of their fees and levies. They pay money into this fund that actually addresses those pieces of infrastructure that don't have an owner. In many cases, they are old wells that they don't even know who they ever belong to. There are features that are not included in that, like seismic lines. And by seismic, I'm not talking about seismic activity. I'm talking about the way that oil and gas used to be explored for in the past. But there are lots of excellent ideas, particularly coming from nations in terms of what to do with those. But the rest is covered through the Orphan Fund, and the Orphan Fund is paid for by industry contributing to it. So there is a system in the oil and gas side of things. That's why I was saying there's a lot of mandated stuff that's already covered. So as a sector, if you are in restoration, actually, I'd be very happy to be in a sector that I know my demand is kind of given, because I know that there's activity I'll have to deal with from 30 years past, and there will be activity that's happening right now that will have to be dealt with in 30 years. So it's there.
That's a fantastic answer. And I think what I essentially heard you saying is if the public says that restoration of environmental liabilities, past, present, is important, you need ongoing industrial activity to contribute to these funds, to have that workforce trained up and ready and available to do it. And if we're looking at a decline in that industry and its activities, paying for past restoration might become an issue.
Likely will become a government responsibility with time. So it talks about this life cycle that all industries actually have. So, but I don't think we have to worry about that at this moment. Industry is drilling much less than they were because of what we talked about. Progress from a technological perspective, you don't need to drill that much to be able to actually produce more and more gas, and then the environmental impact is actually less, and there's less to clean up. So, it's a very interesting cycle, and I didn't get onto all other industries that I don't know that much about.
Oh, it's totally fair. We're hoping to do more of these webinars, by the way. So this won't be the only one. I'm hoping we'll be exploring a range of the other topics that are covered in the report. But any thoughts to add on that, Simone, from your perspective on, how we can create that sort of economic base in an ongoing sense for the region for environmental priorities, for cultural priorities, for community-based local priorities? Like, how do we knit all these disparate threads together?
I think just like more workshops, more accessible events for the public. Because a lot of like economic ideas are obvious to most people, but some people they don't instantly grasp it. And to get people up to a basic level of economic literacy would improve so many things and so many initiatives. Because people are at a baseline of understanding that, hey, this is good. Like, let's explore this.
And you're someone who's worked in that industry, in that business. Is there any type of question that, you often get from your family, your community that, you always want to sort of preempt and educate them on as it relates to, how oil and gas works, or, how investment decisions are made, or how businesses operate?
I don't really get many burning questions. Everybody's just largely supportive, and they're very happy that I do what I do. Most people's questions I find are just very basic, like how does, the pipeline work? Like people don't understand the very most rudimentary processes. And so what I find is that, as simple as explaining how pipe is welded together and what phase that is in the construction part of it is so wildly over people's heads, and like explaining like, oh yeah, so you have to coat the welds after, and they're like, why? And that's just like, people just don't have any sort of context or like, I guess, learning opportunities about our local resources. So people are kind of not tuned into how anything works, or how, the lumber industry, or like why it's failing. And it's just, people just aren't as curious. And I think we spoke about this earlier. And it's just about how do we spark that curiosity in our industries.
Well, it's essential to all of us, to have the quality of life that we have here in BC, for there to be that broader understanding of, what types of activities drive it. And, that's obviously not just oil and gas, although it is one of our most valuable, most productive, most in-demand export products. It's critical minerals, it's services, it's expertise and innovation. It's we have a great film industry here, and ability to have the studio, because there's a great talent pool of local filmmakers here in Vancouver in particular. And there's lots of these other things where people know it from a personal level, like, hey, I work in natural resources, say, or I work in business and I know how business decisions are made, or maybe I've studied economics a little bit, but few people are able to see that big picture because it's so complex. And I think when we wanted to turn it to Rawi, anything you wanted to add, of course, first of all, but I think maybe more broadly, since you started working in this space, what sort of questions have you gotten, and how have you answered them?
I feel like with the changing times and everything, people just live through sound bites now. They just want a clear statement, even though things are not black and white. So if I'm gonna go with one soundbite from our discussion today, I think something that Simone just said, I think it's still ringing in my head. Having that curiosity in our industries, whatever the industry is, just asking the questions and just understanding how the world works. Like how we get our food, how we turn on the lights, and any of those questions are just important for us to have more productive dialogues and discussions moving forward. And to answer your second question, I guess, since I started working with ResourceWorks or working on this project, leaving classroom walls per se, and as amazing as academia is in like boosting some of the critical thinking that you need to have to grok some of these questions, if it does help you with that, it's actually just talking to people, experts in whatever field they're in. And I think there's a lot of work that you can do, like desk research, that you can try to like understand some of the toughest questions out there. Like some of the questions you asked Inez or Simone, as Inez said, like she could win a Nobel Prize if she were to answer any of them. But I think desk research is one way of doing it, doing your own research. But actually talking to experts in the field, I think, has been the most fruitful part of this whole like process for me. People that know exactly how to guide your thinking, because they were also a beginner at some stage and they didn't know what information to omit, what information to look for. So talking to experts, I think, that is the one key takeaway for me for this project, for future projects, for future life endeavors in general. Just like talk to people that know what they do best, and they're also learning still. So yeah, those conversations are also fruitful for them as well. So yeah.
Oh, we're navigating nonstop complexity on every single one of these issues at every time. And that's true for someone who's deeply immersed in them as their career, someone who's looking at a headline and trying to make sense of, oh, what am I seeing? How does this relate to this other thing that I'm sort of aware of? And, whether it's your day-to-day priority or it isn't, it's a task of communicators, it's a task of governments, task of industries to make that information accessible and to allow for people to more meaningfully engage with it in a relatable way, so they can translate it to their values and their priorities and their worldview, whatever that may be.
Well, and you talked about communicators, and I think that's key. Sometimes you go to the expert, and I've said this to many industry people through the years, and they try to explain to you hydraulic fracturing, and after, I'm an economist by training, so they've tried. After a while, it becomes really kind of complicated because they are the experts. So they go to a lot of the expert lingo and all that. And sometimes instead of having clarity, you end up actually more confused. Yeah. So there's a huge role for communicators, for those people that are great and understanding the technical part and converting into something that somebody that doesn't have that particular area of expertise can understand and grasp. So that word I really liked it, kind of as part of a counterpoint to what Rawi was saying, because there's a room there to translate for everybody.
Absolutely. Well, I consider myself in that camp, communicators, and it's tough, even for me. I had this amazing experience on several occasions. There's this guy in Victoria, Jeff, who knows everything about natural gas production, and there's times where he sat me down and just sort of started sketching out diagrams and walking me through, like, okay, this is how horizontal wells are drilled, and here's like how they work, and here's things about pressure and all of this, and I can't even retain like the high level details, but it's going beyond words. It's into diagrams, it's into anecdotes, into as Simone said, giving people an actual voice at the table so they can ask their questions wherever they may come from. As I always like to say to our team, there's really no such thing as a stupid question. You need to, in fact, sometimes say, I have a stupid question. Can I ask it, please? Because that helps, equalize it and signals to the person, hey, I am still trying to wrap my head around it. Help me make sense of something that to you is common sense and logical because you've immersed yourself in this, but to others, maybe a little bit more difficult. Conscious of time, we're going to just take one more question from the audience, and we have one on permitting. Another complex thing that many people are struggling with. And I just wanted to give each of you a chance to share your thoughts on, the permitting landscape in the Northeast, high level, what you're seeing and hearing. We'll start with Simone with this one. Like, what are the thoughts you have on how we can get to better outcomes on the permitting side, whether that's permitting working closely with Indigenous communities, them actually issuing permits, or whether that's permitting as a whole for the types of work that companies you've worked with, the company that you own, Siski, is trying to do.
Ooh. So yeah, permitting in my region has been majorly stalled. I, among other people, would love to see more permits issued. I know that there's a huge backlog of even just low-level permits that really don't need to be sitting around for as many days as they are. But like, I'll be honest, I don't even know who runs our permitting, like our lands department. So I know there's one guy, but then, like there's, like I said, third parties, there's consultants, there's lawyers. So it's how do you answer that question when even our community is kind of barred from understanding that process? And I think I have actually asked for a record of permits that have been approved, and I just never heard back from anybody. So it's a question that plagues even community members. I would also love to know, how do we address that issue?
Mm-hmm. The transparency and building that capacity, if I had to hazard a guess. But yeah, probably any thoughts on that or broader permitting challenges? You touched on it in your presentation. Like, what are the findings you've been hearing?
Yeah, any thoughts I would have are more of like kind of like diagnosing the issue or spelling out the issue, which most people are talking about today, right? Like the time frames are double what the province initially wanted. And that comes for a lot of reasons too, right? Like there's a lot of commitments that we're adhering to as a province, as a nation now. So that comes with costs, right? Like again, the shared decision making. That's a huge stake at the table now that we need to honor and commit to. So that comes with timeline costs as well that we need to also understand. But diagnosing the issue and actually coming up with a solution and an answer is, I digress from that, to be fair. I don't know if Inez has a better answer for it.
Well, it's a matter of some professional expertise you have. Do we just throw more money at the problem, Inez, or are there other ways?
I think during my times working on all the liquefied natural gas projects that were proposed, the province back when there were like 20 on the table or more than 20 at the table, I remember hearing many Indigenous leaders talking about, you should come see us first. And I don't think that necessarily solves the problem, but it makes the conversation better. When you go and see a community, and particularly when you're talking about the Northeast, where there's overlapping territories. So in many cases, you might be dealing with a nation that is supported to a certain development. Another nation might not be supported to exactly the same project in the same place. And you have to take those things into consideration. The sooner you start having that conversation, the better. In an ideal world, as an ex-employee for the regulator, what I would have loved to see is, here's my application and here are the letters in which, all these nations that I had to deal with actually agree or at least didn't disagree with the work being done that way in that particular place. Again, it sounds like utopia, but that's why I put so much emphasis on the whole restoration conversation, because I think that as parties that have stopped trusting each other for a long time, finding files where we have common interest, working on them, like, just getting our leaves up and sitting down and working on solutions. I think it's the best way of actually getting that trust back together, and that could help and spill on future development and permitting for future development. But again, I might be a little utopic here.
That's a fantastic answer. Like much of the conversation, the way that it has played out on the federal impact assessment process, it has talked about, earlier conversations. Pre-consultation is, I think, the term used in the Impact Assessment Act. And, that's a legislative tool. But again, this is sort of on the premise that these are contests that need to be contested in a regulatory process, as opposed to there being the ability, the infrastructure, the institutional knowledge, the relationships, and the trust. And I think that's really key to what you've said, where even before it goes to the regulator, industry has already understood, okay, if I want to get something built here, I need to have that long-standing relationship of trust with the communities in which I operate and the rights and title holders that are going to have a significant say on whether I can perform small activities or big activities for mega projects with hundreds and thousands of little permits that are issued, and big permits for that matter. And I really like that spin on it, because I think it puts into perspective that this isn't just about one project or one permit. It's about your footprint in the community overall, and how you honor that relationship. How do you prioritize communities' needs and interests in a deeper way? How do you support community members and help educate them? How do you provide opportunities to local entrepreneurs so that they can, whether they're in government or not, in their political process or not, they can be part of that trust building within the nation as a whole. So that's a really great way to end this webinar. Before we fully wrap up, I'm going to just pass to every person here to share any wrap-up thoughts they want with the audience, and then we'll do just a little bit around wrap-up. But thanks to everyone who joined us. Let's see, Rawi, do you want to share some closing thoughts?
Thank you to anyone that joined us today. I think we're just hoping to have more of these conversations, and the more the better. And yeah, thank you for facilitating as well the conversation.
It's been a lot of fun. Inez, any closing thoughts on your end?
Oh, again, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. It was actually a pleasure having this conversation and the previous conversation we had behind scenes, which was also great. And again, good to make new friends.
Absolutely. And Simone?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody. This has been an incredible experience, and I'm always so humbled when I'm given these opportunities to speak, because I feel like it's such an honor to represent Blueberry. I hold a lot of nation pride, and I just want more youth from my community to speak up and to know that our voices are heard. So I'm glad that I was able to example that today. Thank you so much.
And thank you to both of you for joining us, and flying out from across the straits and all the way from the Northeast to be here today. This is part of our broader series, Shared Prosperity series that we're doing. So this won't be the first regional study that we do. And we're hoping to empower more British Columbians to share their perspectives about the place that they live in, the place that is home, the place that they're proud of, so that we can really gain that deeper understanding collectively about different systems, different economies, different industries, different communities and their outlooks and perspectives, so that we can make better, more informed decisions together as a society. So we'll be sharing more about that in the coming months, but thanks so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.